Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 3. This is a very long chapter. I'm going to tell you what to focus on. Let's dive into digestion. All right, let's start with our learning objectives. First, I want you to be able to trace the pathway that food travels through the GI tract. I want you to describe the organs, the muscular actions, sphincters, secretions of digestion, and examine what role each plays in absorption and digestion. So we're going to go over this in detail. We're going to examine how 3 anatomical structures of the small intestines increase its surface area. Describe 4 types of absorption into enterocytes of the small intestine. And then we're going to talk about how nutrients are absorbed from the GI tract into the lymphatic system and vascular system. So I want you to read about these systems in your book with respect to how they pertain to digestion. I want you to be able to list the accessory organs of the GI tract and their associated ducts and sphincters and describe their role in digestion. I want you to be able to describe where the body stores nutrients, and then finally define probiotics and prebiotics and explain why they are important for our gastrointestinal health. Let's jump in. So first of all, why do we care about digestion? So we started off in the semester talking about how nutrition fit into this overall picture of wellness, why nutrition is so important for our overall well-being. And then we talked about designing a healthy eating pattern. And so now we're at the point where we want to know, when we ingest these nutrients, if we're eating the right things, and if we're not, what happens to these nutrients once they enter into our body? Where do they go? How do we get them where they need to be? Okay, so you are more than welcome to read the whole chapter if you'd like. It's a very lengthy chapter. We are going to focus on, and I want you to focus on, section 3.2, 3.3, 3.8, 3.9, and 3.10. These are all listed in on your course webpage. You can read the whole chapter if you want, but like I said, focus on those sections. All right, so let's break it down and talk about what happens to the food we eat. So first of all, big picture, digestion is when we break down food mechanically by our mouths and chemically into absorbable molecules, because what we really want to do is get those nutrients into our body. We want to be able to absorb them and get them where they need to be. What is absorption? This is when molecules pass through the wall of the small intestine. That's where the vast majority of absorption takes place, the small intestine, and other digestive organs into the vascular system and the lymph system. So we'll talk about that. Then these nutrients are transported to cells for metabolism. And then finally, anything that we don't use, our undigested food and waste products, get eliminated from our body. So that's basically in a nutshell what happens to the food that we eat. So let's talk about metabolism. You've heard me use this word before. So chemical reactions are constantly occurring in our cells. We are forming bone tissue, we're forming new skin cells. We need a constant supply of energy. Maybe we're walking to class, maybe we're sleeping. Even when we're sleeping, our brain is still going and we need energy. You obviously need more energy when you're running a race compared to with when you're sitting on your couch watching TV, but you need energy for both of these and for actually everything we do. When we eat our food, we can't use this energy directly. We need to take the energy in the bonds of our food and convert it to usable energy. And this usable energy is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And we get this, as I said, from the bonds that are in our food, from our carbohydrates, our lipids, and our proteins. These are our energy-yielding nutrients. We, of course, also need water and enzymes. We don't break those down, though, directly. We need them to help our cells perform these reactions. And then we also need chemical regulators like hormones and vitamins and minerals. So this is why we don't just need to eat proteins and lipids and carbohydrates. Those are the ones we get our energy from, but we need the other nutrients in order to help with those reactions. So metabolism really it can be summed up by saying these are all the chemical reactions that take place in our body. And these include the reactions of cellular respiration. So you can see, I'm going to get my pointer here, you can see I've got a glucose molecule here. When we talk about cellular respiration, glucose is usually what is described as being broken down. We can absolutely use lipids and proteins in this process too. It's just it's easiest to describe it with glucose. And so you can see here fats come into the equation a little bit later, so do proteins. This one arrow cellular respiration, this represents many thousands of chemical reactions that happen in order to yield ATP, usable energy for our cells. In the process, we use oxygen, we give off CO2, which we exhale, and we give off water. So we take in our energy-yielding nutrients, our body breaks them down in a series of many complicated reactions, and we convert the energy in these bonds to ATP. So that's basically cellular respiration in a nutshell. So we're converting our food, the energy in our food, to usable energy in the form of ATP. So let's talk about digestion and the digestive system. This is what I'm going to be spending most of my time talking about. Excuse me. And I'm going to break my video presentations up into several so that you don't have to watch me talk for an hour or so. We can break it up into these smaller videos. Okay, so let's talk about the gastrointestinal tract. We can also call this the GI tract. So this is a series of organs arranged in a long, flexible, muscular tube. And we're going to talk in detail about each of the organs that make up the GI tract. The main organs are the stomach and the intestines, and then they're separated from each other by sphincters, and these are muscles that control the passage of food from one organ to the next. So our digestive system consists of 6 major organs: the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestines, the large intestines, and the rectum. And then there are 3 accessory organs, really important ones that we're going to talk about: the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. Okay, so I included this because, this is figure 3.9, I included this because it gives a nice overview what each of these 6 organs that I just told you about of the GI tract do. And it also gives you a breakdown of what the liver and the gallbladder and the pancreas do. So please review this. It's figure 3.9 in your textbook. Okay, so before we go into the process of digestion, starting with our mouth, and going through our GI tract, I do want to talk to you about enzymes. So enzymes are important for breaking down food particles and for nutrient absorption. So what are enzymes? These are basically proteins that speed up the rate of a reaction. And you've probably learned this before. We're just going to review this. So here is a molecule of sucrose. I told you that the energy is in the bonds of the energy-yielding nutrients that we eat. So here's an enzyme. This is the sucrase enzyme. Enzymes usually end with ase. And what happens is, with a little help from ATP and the enzyme, this sucrose molecule fits into this enzyme nicely, and the enzyme helps to break that sucrose molecule down so that our body can digest it. So that is what enzymes do. They speed up the rate of a chemical reaction, and they're really important for digestion and absorption. Okay, so up here, because there are so many steps to digestion, I made this little key, and you're going to always be able to figure out where we are in the presentation by looking at which of these is bolded. So let's start with mouth. Here you can see I've bolded mouth. This is pretty obvious. The function of the mouth is to mechanically break down food and hydrate it with saliva. And you can see that I'm saying that this is voluntary. So many of the processes of digestion are involuntary. That means we don't have any control of them. Our stomach has lots of muscles. It churns that food around. That's involuntary. We don't tell our stomach to digest our food, to churn all this food. Most of digestion is involuntary, but there are going to be a few things you'll see that are voluntary. So we chew. Sometimes when we are doing other things, we're not quite mindful that we're chewing, but we are controlling the chewing in a voluntary way. We have lots of taste buds on our tongue, and these taste buds sense the food that we're eating. So you're probably familiar with sweet, sour, salty, bitter. You might not be familiar with the term umami. So umami is this really like flavorful taste. It's described as brothy, meaty, savory in some foods. So if you have like a slow roast that's been roasting all day, or you sear some mushrooms, so it's that kind of a taste. And our sense of smell greatly contributes to the ability to sense taste. So when we're chewing our food and we're tasting our food, our sense of smell is really giving us a lot of that flavor too. And as you know, for some people who get COVID, they lose their sense of smell and therefore their sense of taste, or part of it. Food that tastes good to you normally, if you lose your sense of smell, won't taste as good. So our taste buds are very important for tasting our food, and our sense of smell as well. Okay, so the first secretion of the digestive tract is saliva. So what does saliva do? Well, it moistens our mouth and it allows us to chew our food without it being too dry. It contains digestive enzymes that help to start break down the food in our mouth. And so smell, sight, taste, and tactile stimuli, like feeling food in our mouth, excites the sensors in our nervous system, which signal the release of saliva from our salivary glands. And you know this feeling. If you start even just thinking about your favorite food, you start to salivate. Your body is getting ready. It's preparing for that meal. Okay, so we've talked about the mouth briefly. Let's move on to the esophagus. So the esophagus is basically this tube that connects our throat with our stomach. We've got to get the food down there. It goes through, it goes down the esophagus. So the main function of the esophagus is to transport food to the stomach. All right, let's look at some terminology. So here is a side view of what happens when we chew and when we have a bolus of food. So a bolus is basically just the clump of food that we chew and swallow. I don't like that word. Everybody has their words that they don't like. I don't like the word bolus, but we're going to use this because this is a nutrition class, so we have to use the word bolus. So when we swallow, our soft palate actually blocks off our nasal system from everything else. So you can actually feel that when you swallow. You can't breathe when you swallow, and that's because our soft palate comes down to block that off. We'll look at that more in a moment. Okay, here is this epiglottis here that I want to talk about, and this is a flap of skin that actually closes off your trachea when you swallow a bolus of food. Our throat, our pharynx, this is this open area back here. Our throat is open. This is how we get air. It's open to both our esophagus and our trachea. And so when we swallow food, we definitely don't want that food to get into our trachea. That can result in choking. And so the epiglottis comes down and blocks the trachea so that the food goes down into our esophagus. So let's look at this. So the epiglottis folds down over the trachea during swallowing. And so you can see here, this person is swallowing. The epiglottis, this little flap here, has folded down to block the trachea right here. And then you can also see our soft palate closes off our nasal passage, whereas here it's open. This is why when we breathe through our nose, the air can come down into our trachea. We can also breathe through our mouth and the air can come down through our trachea. When we swallow, our soft palate automatically blocks this area right here. Every now and then we malfunction, and so if you're eating and your friend says something funny and you laugh, you can get food that can come up your nose. Sometimes you see kids with spaghetti that's coming out of their nose, and what has happened is they've gone to swallow this spaghetti, or they're chewing this spaghetti, it's in their mouth, and it comes up here because the soft palate can't close quickly enough. Okay, so that's the soft palate and the epiglottis. This is hard to visualize, so I have a video that I do want to show you.
Normal breathing, inhalation, and exhalation occurs through the mouth and nose. Airflow moving through the nose enables smell sensation. Airflow out of the lungs can produce vocal sounds when passing between the vocal cords, causing it to vibrate. During a normal swallow, the larynx elevates and moves forward and acts as a mechanical lever. This action causes the epiglottis to flip down over the tracheal entrance, thereby protecting the airway and directing food or liquids into the esophagus for a normal swallow. The vocal folds also close and breathing temporarily stops. Food and liquids are propelled into the esophagus and at the same time kept out of the larynx and trachea for a safe and effective swallow. So
that video shows really well what happens when the epiglottis folds down so that we don't get food into our trachea. Okay, again, here's that word. A bolus is a mass of swallowed food. Here I'm showing you we're still in the esophagus, so the mouth would be up here. Here's the esophagus, and there's this thing that happens called peristalsis, and this is a muscular action that pushes our food down the digestive tract. It starts up in the esophagus, and it continues throughout the digestive tract, and this is something that is involuntary. When we swallow, peristalsis automatically happens to push this food down through our digestive tract. And I have a nice little video. I include the link here because I show this in my in-person class, and I'm gonna make sure that you guys have this link too on the course webpage. Okay, so our food has left the esophagus and now it is entering into the stomach. So here is our first sphincter, another great word. So let's see, what is a sphincter? It's this ring of muscles that I talked to you about in the first few slides. So the lower esophageal sphincter opens as this bolus of food approaches, and it closes almost immediately, well, it's supposed to at least. And this prevents the reflux of acid into the esophagus. As you know, our stomach is very acidic. We'll talk about that. And if this sphincter is open, you can get acid reflux or heartburn. It is very painful. We know that we need a very highly acidic environment in our stomach to start the digestion process. We don't want that going up into our esophagus. Our stomach has lots of mucus to protect us from this highly acidic environment. Our esophagus does not, which is why it really hurts when you have heartburn or acid reflux. Okay, here's Phil again. This is Phil from chapter 2. He ate too much cereal. Remember, he had too many carbs. So Phil must have done a bunch of photo shoots for this book because now he has heartburn. So what's happening is Phil's lower esophageal sphincter is not closing properly. So this happens when the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes. It should only relax during swallowing, but it can be relaxed other times as well. For example, when there's pressure on the stomach, like during pregnancy, if somebody is obese, this can cause increased pressure on the sphincter. And this can be a really serious problem, acid reflux, or it can be just something that happens from time to time when you eat too many tomatoes or something that's very acidic, and then you just take a few Tums. But this can turn into a serious problem.